Hello and welcome to Creating a Family. Talk about adoption, foster care, and kinship care. I'm Tracy Whitney, your host for today's episode and the content manager for creatingafamily.org. I'm excited to be learning with you today about the variety of issues related to adopting older kids. And we recognize that welcoming an older child to your home can feel both overwhelming, confusing, terrifying, and exciting and joyful. And so we want to prepare you for the joys and the challenges of parenting and adopting older children. Our guests for today's conversation are Sarah Hansen and Simi Reisner. Sarah Hansen is the Director of International Adoption Advocacy at the Gladney Center for Adoption. She has 20 plus years of experience supporting adoptive families and children. She's also an adoptive parent to an older child from Thailand. And Simi is the Executive Director of Mazie Adoption and Family Services. She's a licensed social worker and foster parent. She has lived experience as an adult adoptee and a passion for maintaining sibling relationships and promoting transparency within the adoption community. Both of these ladies have served as social workers for our family's adoption experiences. And so I've known them for a really long time, and I'm thrilled that you guys get to learn from their experience and their wisdom as I've been able to do in the past. So welcome, ladies, to Creating a Family.
Thank you so much, Tracy. What a lovely introduction. I am so excited to be here and talk about this. Older child adoption is one of my passions. So thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Well, before we dive into the needs and the behaviors and the strategies for older child adoption, let's get a working definition of what we mean by older. So, Sarah, when we're talking about older in relation to international adoption, what are the ages that we're talking about?
Sure. So in the resources, you're going to see kind of a general working definition of 5 plus,
Okay.
but I would put it more in the 8, 9 plus range with a cap at 16. With international, a child cannot immigrate to the US after the age of 16. So We're looking at 8-ish, 9-ish to 15 and a half.
Okay. And Simi, what about foster care adoption?
Similarly, I think a lot of the materials are going to read 5 and up. School age is what a lot of families will come to us saying that they're looking for. However, for foster care adoption, I would say we creep more so into preparing families to welcome a child over 10.
Okay.
10 and over. And in foster care adoption, generally, this might vary state by state, but you can enter a family up to 21.
Okay. So what is the age range that is maybe the most difficult to place in international adoption, Sarah?
For international, I would say it's 8, 9 plus.
And how about you, Simi? What about foster care adoption? What's maybe the hardest age to place?
That's tough to say. I think a lot of families have reservations and fear when it comes to tweens and teens, especially teens. It is often just lack of experience and knowledge, but that's a really tough age to find a home for. Mm-hmm.
Well, that leads very well into our next question. Why do you think that prospective adoptive parents are leery of bringing home a teenager? Sarah, can you start us off with some of the things that you've seen?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, unfortunately, our teens and tweens, just in society in general, they don't have the best reputation. You talk to parents about, oh, you're entering those teen years, and you get oh, here we go. So I think just starting with that in general, society has their own preconceived views of teens and tweens. And then when you throw in, kids that have been part of a child welfare system, that just adds to that kind of bad reputation, if you will. We often find that parents just have these preconceived notions that these are just wild kids.
Right. Simi, do you see that? You probably see that to be true also in foster care, but do you see more or other concerns or fears that parents might have about welcoming a foster teen?
Sure. I think in general, we are just afraid of what we don't know and what we don't understand yet, right, as parents. So a lot of our families are coming in, and when we're preparing families to think about what age range you are the most comfortable with, what do you feel most prepared to parent, there is, a misconception that older youth will be kind of like moldable. They're going to come in having this lived experience already. And I do, feel that families fear how that will fit into their home, which is natural. And
Yeah.
also, I do believe that people think teens have experienced more trauma that they can remember,
Hmm.
but we know that it's not just, trauma is not just what you can remember. Your body remembers it, right? So even if you were very young, it's tough. So I feel that that's really what families are afraid of or hesitant about.
Yeah, I think that looking at a teen who has experienced trauma, we tend to forget that it's not, like you said, different than what a little child has experienced, except that it's maybe more manifested on the outside. It's more expressed on the outside in their behaviors or their attitudes or their inability to put words to it, or instead of putting words to it, they're putting maybe maladaptive behaviors to it. So when you couple that with the already kind of stigma against teenagers that many families have, that's a pretty sticky wicket for a lot of families, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And so when we were talking about challenging behaviors or maladaptive behaviors, what are some of the behaviors that you would most commonly expect to see? Simi, we'll start with you, that you might expect to see in an older child. And we have to, let's give the caveat here that not every older child who's adopted at 5 and older or 10 and older is going to express these behaviors. But what are some of the common behaviors that prospective parents might expect to see in an older child?
I think like you're saying, we really have to start with what the individual youth's needs are, because there's going to be such a wide spectrum here. So you may have one youth who has a strong desire for independence,
Mm-hmm.
where you might have another youth that's craving that individual attention and affection. So two totally different sides of the spectrum there, that you have to deal with in different ways. A lot of testing behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
typical things you hear about: lying, manipulative behaviors. These are trauma responses. It's going to happen. Our youth want us to know that, or want to know that we're going to stay, that we're going to be there for them. So they've experienced trauma, like we've talked about, loss, disappointment, and, how can we expect them to trust us naturally? That's not just something we should assume is going to happen. They've really been hurt, most likely, in their lives, and we have to earn that back as parents.
And so some of the ways that we'll see them trying to earn that might be that testing that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, what other behaviors are you preparing parents for when you talk about this?
Physically acting out, potentially sexually acting out. And I think it's also important to point out that these behaviors may not necessarily have shown themselves previously. So you may have a good history of the child. You may have I shouldn't say good, but you may have the history of the child, report from whatever care they were in, and no mention of any of these behaviors, but yet they could still come out once that child is placed in your home. Again, to Simi's point, it's more a trauma response, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more about as we move on. But these behaviors, especially the more aggressive behaviors or acting out, that could look like, smaller things like, oh, just throwing a book, not even at a person, but just whatever's closest, pick it up and throw it because I'm mad, all the way to some physical aggression towards others, towards pets, or self-harm. That's on, the more significant end of the spectrum, but it's also something that parents should prepare for in the case of, if this does happen in my home, what is my plan?
Absolutely. That's a good point.
Yeah, what is the plan? And one of the things that we maybe didn't touch on is the lagging social skills. And so, kind of to recap the behaviors, lying and stealing, lagging social skills, acting out physically or sexually. Sibling rivalry is another one that we didn't mention.
Mm-hmm.
They may not know how to be part of a family. They may not have had a model or a lived experience with family dynamics. And so sometimes sibling rivalry may come up in that physical aggression, but it may just be like this tension between siblings that because they just don't know how to behave with a sibling. And then another thing that we need to make sure we clarify is the regression of already developed skills. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as we get towards the trauma conversation, but regression of skills. When you get a child that you were told was potty trained, or you get a child that you were told, is a great sleeper, and all of a sudden they're home with you for maybe 3-4 weeks, and a 10-year-old's not sleeping through the night anymore, and they're getting up and wandering, or 10-year-old is having accidents, urine or stool accidents, and that was not in the files kind of an attitude. And so those are some of the common things that we'll see when bringing home an older child through adoption.
I think that brings up a good point too that we didn't touch on, but chronological age versus developmental age.
Oh,
so these kids are all over the map. Some things they're doing, you're going to think they're like 24. They're so independent. Other things, they have a reaction of a 3-year-old and everything in between. So parenting by age goes out the window. We're not parenting these kids by age. It's not, well, once you're 10, you get to, we have to look at the individual child, get to know them, get to know where they fall in that trajectory and parent them accordingly.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'll always remember. Our founding executive director, Dawn Davenport, used to call it many kids in one body. And it's so challenging for adoptive parents to look at the child in front of them and not just see their age, but see that there's lots of ages all wrapped up inside that one child's experience. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
And I think too, and I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, but, especially for parents who maybe this is their first adoption and they have biological kids in the home, if that's something that's their go-to is parenting by age, now's the time to start pulling back, tweaking that, working with your children on how the parenting is going to change and the why behind it. But you really got to have some reflection on the way that you parent before you welcome this child into your home.
Well, that brings us to how to look at the children in our home and what behaviors we might see in them when we welcome another child into the family dynamic. Simi, are there common behaviors that you have seen in families that bring home an older child that are specific to the children who were already living in the home? We call them resident children. So behaviors that resident children might start manifesting or expressing when a new child comes to the family.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is why whole family preparation is so important during a family profile or a home study process, training, because so much focus is put on training the prospective adoptive parents, right? And we're not looking at what do the resident children or the grandparents that are living in the home need or whomever, it's a whole family system. So really taking the time to prepare the whole family is very important. You could see regression, just kind of like we talked about. That could be attention seeking. Maybe the children in the home are regressing because they know that if they act a certain way, they'll get some attention and they might be, missing being, whether it's an only child or there were 2 children in the home before. So all of that's very natural. We see a lot of, sometimes there can be a difference too between attention seeking behaviors in one child and then another child. You might see them more like pulling back and kind of like ducking away into, the shadows, I guess, because they don't want to cause, they think I'm not as important. My parents are really focusing on, this new child and they don't care about me anymore. They're treating me differently. And so we can see that as well. In kinship families, it's a whole different shift because you're seeing such a change in family roles. You might have an aunt or a grandmother now that is taking on a caretaker role. So that really throws the whole family for a loop. So the jealousy, sibling rivalry, not understanding where their place is I think really big for youth. Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that? Other things that you might see in a resident child?
Um, yeah, I would just add, the importance of expectations. This isn't just a immediate new playmate. And even those expectations
Yeah.
for the prospective adoptive parents,
Mhm.
adopting an older child isn't an avenue to get the current resident child a playmate. You're going to have sibling rivalry. And to Simi's point as well, these kids, they're changing their position in the lineup. Your youngest was the baby for however long, potentially a long time. If your youngest in the home is 12 when you're
Mhm.
welcoming this 10-year-old, they've been the baby for 12 years. That's a big shift then to bring in a new baby, if you will. So yeah, it's, I think, again, a lot has to do with preparation. And as Simi said, the whole family unit, explaining to your resident kids ahead of time why your parenting techniques maybe are shifting now in preparation and how they're going to continue to shift and evolve when the new child is home and the why behind that. And then once the new kiddo is in your home, the reminders, because,
Mhm.
for the resident kids, it's you can conceptualize it, but once you're in it, even sometimes our parents, you forget the training, you forget about the things that you were told, and you're in it now. I think, you need to give those reminders to the resident kids as well. I'll share, we get a lot in my house still, and we're home almost 2 years of, oh, that's not fair. You let him do anything. And we had to remind, like, remember, we said it was going to be
Mhm.
a little bit different. Expectations are different because he's still learning how to be a part of a family. You've had that practice now for 13 years. So I think just the ongoing conversations from before the placement and then beyond.
Well, and as long as we're sharing, my girls have been home 14 and 17 years. And the other day, or 12 and 17 years, the other day I said to one of them, "You're 14 years old. You should know this by now." And I was like, as soon as I said it, I thought, oh, but she's not 14 in all the ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
give yourself some grace. 2 years is still that big learning curve. And then she's been home for
Absolutely.
12 years and I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm sorry to interrupt this conversation, but I want to make sure you know about a learning opportunity that we have for you. And we heard in this interview a lot about learning and keep learning. And so one of those opportunities is our library of free courses sponsored by the Jockey Being Family Foundation. There's 15 courses in this free library, and you can take as many of them as you want. They come with a certificate of completion if you pass the quiz at the end, and you can learn and keep learning. And the courses get rotated across a year. And so it's an opportunity to, again, learn and keep learning. If you go to bit.ly/JBF support, that's bit.ly/JBF support, you can take advantage of any of the courses that are there. And now let's go back to the show. So let's go back a little bit and talk about the behaviors that a new child who's, 8, 10, 11 years old and older might be expressing in our home. What are the things that are underneath the behavior? And one of the things that we talk about at Creating a Family all the time is that behavior is an expression of a need. And so when we look at behavior as a communication, what are the things underneath the behavior that would be driving those behaviors? What's kind of the need underneath it that we should be tuning into when we see maybe some of these challenging behaviors? Sarah, do you want to tackle that one first for us?
Sure, yeah. How much time do we have left? How many
I
minutes?
know this is a big
It's
one.
quite
This
the
is a
list.
big
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. These behaviors come from so many different things. And I think your initial point is spot on, that just reminding yourself that there's reasons behind these behaviors. They're not just, being a nudge. But it comes from their grief and loss. It comes from unpredictability. Perhaps they have some complex medical needs and spent a lot of time in and out of medical care. There could be mental health diagnoses or, undiagnosed mental health needs at play here. I think a lot of it all comes back to that trauma piece, that fear piece, living in a state of stress for so many years in their prior years. And parents will learn from different trainings on trauma. Trauma impacts the brain in profound ways, just how the brain is wired. So to live in a constant state of stress, think of your own stress response. Say a car cuts you off, you slam on those brakes so hard and you were this close to missing it. Like you feel it in your limbs, you're tingling, maybe you get cold and clammy, you're nauseous, and just all these things. Like these kids are living in that state for years and years and years. That's not something you could just turn off. I think it's important too. So when we're talking about that, I think of the fight, flight, or freeze response.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we see in our kids when they're having a moment, when they're flipping their lid over something that you think is minor. Oh, I gave him a hard shell taco instead of a soft shell, and we've just lost it. That's just because that's his body, his body's reaction to that stress. He's perceiving everything as a potential danger, as a potential threat, and immediately goes into fight, flight, or freeze mode.
You touched on it a little bit, the undiagnosed medical issues. I think we sometimes forget the stress of living with a body that doesn't feel right. On top of all the experiences that they've had before they've come to us, if they come home and they have these undiagnosed challenges, learning challenges or health challenges, living with a body that doesn't feel right or that they don't know where it fits. I love the way you put that that level of stress all the time creates such difficult conditions for them to know how to behave. And sometimes we look at those behaviors as moral issues. Lying is a common challenge for many families. And we look at it as a moral issue, and really it's a survival issue. And they're trying to protect themselves, and they're trying to, buffer themselves from any potential other threats that might come. And when we can put that down and look at it as what's underneath that, what are they trying to say to us that they don't know how to say, it can really help us. Simi, do you think that there's any other kind of underlying needs or issues that we maybe haven't touched on yet that you want to make sure you mention?
Sure, yeah. And when you just made note of lying, it, made me think about some of our older youth from the foster care system, where sometimes they unfortunately have come from situations where they had to protect their parents, their caregivers, their first families. So that is something that possibly has been ingrained in them as not a bad thing. It has been survival. It is something that they had to do potentially to protect them. And that loyalty is deep. So that is something that is not so easy to just teach a youth that it's wrong. It's not necessarily just good and bad. We can't look at things like that. We also see a lot of medical trauma, to your point. If youth have had, this goes into the whole, I know one of the resources we always talk about is The Body Keeps the Score, right? Which is such a good one. But it talks about, how if a child, when they were an infant, maybe had a lot of medical trauma leading up into toddlerhood or lack of going to the doctor, and then they had a really traumatic experience or a hospital stay, going to the doctor for typical checkups or anything can be really triggering. So that doesn't just stop when they're, a toddler. That can really impact them. And so we do see that a lot too. And we just don't know what they've experienced. Their bodies, when they're in that fight, flight, or freeze, their bodies don't know the difference between you cutting their sandwich wrong and them being in danger and their whole family being in danger, and it's someone coming into my home to separate me from my family. So we have to help them forever understand that.
Right.
Yeah.
And we know that they're safe when they come to our
Right.
homes, but they don't know it yet.
Mhm.
And I think the only one that we didn't touch on that I want to make sure we do mention is the risk factors of being exposed to drugs and alcohol prenatally.
Yeah.
So with many of our international adoptions, we don't always know if they were. It's pretty rare for us to know if there was prenatal exposure to alcohol or drugs in international adoption. But in foster care adoption, we do often know that information. And when we can look at their behaviors through that lens of what impacts they might be carrying from that prenatal exposure, we can then look at the behaviors with an appropriate eye, not just about their developmental skills, but their coping skills and their understanding of the world and the way that their brain is wired and how it's different than maybe a child without prenatal exposure is wired. And so understanding all those driving needs underneath the trauma, the prenatal exposure, the unpredictability or fear, the flight, fight, or freeze response, any of those coping skills, and then all the undiagnosed things that have presented challenges to their thriving. Once they come to us, we know they're safe. We know that those things can be mitigated and healed and coped with, but they don't know that yet. And so those behaviors can just feel so big and alarming, and we have to just kind of keep those glasses on that say, this is the filter that we're choosing to look at this child through to help them change those behaviors.
Yeah. And it's also how they view themselves too.
Yeah,
so
that's a great point.
If they know that they've had this, if we're taking the drug and alcohol, the substance exposure example, if they know that one of their birth parents had this struggle or a mental health diagnosis, either one, then, later on in life, that might cause them to question, like, well, then who am I in this? Like, is that something that I'm going to present with? Or they may take the route of saying, like, well, it's in my family. It's just something that I'm predisposed to probably do. So might as well just go down that road now because, maybe they're self-sabotaging or they're feeling some type of way. And so we have to help them understand that there is a balance between who they are, where they come from, and it is not good and bad. It's not just that, there is an in between where we can appreciate all aspects of who they are, especially with teens. There's a lot of questioning there with that.
I think, that's, Simi, you've said that so beautifully. And it just made me think too, it's so important to treat each child individually. Like we talk about this list of things, grief and loss, trauma, medical, mental health. Let's say they have all of that. That doesn't necessarily mean that child with that experience is going to exhibit more negative behaviors than maybe a child who just had, a complex medical start to life, but none of the other things that we've discussed, if you will. So I think sometimes, especially when families are first starting to have these conversations and consider older child, sometimes it's easy to think like, oh, well, I'm reading this profile and her background isn't as, involved as his. So she's probably not going to have as many behaviors as he would. That's not the case. We don't know. Each child is completely different. We also don't know. I mean, it's such a puzzle. So parents might ask like, well, why, where are these behaviors coming from? Is it because of the medical trauma? Is it because of the prenatal exposure? It's like, we don't know. Could be all, could be one.
Yes. Yeah.
And figuring out which one those is can sometimes be an exercise in futility when the behaviors are continuing and ramping up and getting worse. And really, our efforts should be at the base understanding is they had a whole life before they came to us. And so how are we going to help them cope with the impacts of that life to improve their behaviors now? Speaking of improving behaviors, Sarah, we're going to start with you. What are some specific strategies that you recommend to parents who are considering older child adoption or who are parenting children that are older through adoption, focused on building that trust, building that felt safety, and setting those foundations for secure attachment as they continue in the family?
I think one of the most important strategies is that connection piece when you're not in a dysregulated state. So you're doing that good work, you're leaning into those moments, whatever that may be. You know, if the child likes playing games, like you're focusing, you want, and our therapist, she said this like on day one, like you need to be doing at least 30 minutes of connection every single day, child led, let him call the shots, whatever he wants to do, 30 minutes a day. Even the days you don't want to. I mean, let's be honest here. There's going to be times where, and I'm the first to admit it, you're going to have a hard time liking your child because when you're facing some of these behaviors day in and day out, you're going to have a hard time, okay, let's play checkers. Like it's tough, but we are the parent, we are the adults, we are the ones who understand these behaviors are rooted in trauma and it's not the child, doing anything against you. I got off tangent there. I'm sorry, but I did just want to like hone in on that connection piece because that work is almost more important than what you're going to do in the heat of the moment. Choices are huge, little things. I mean, these kids have lost all control of everything in their life. So if you can let them control as much as possible, and that may go against, if you've parented in a certain way of, respect or authoritarian or anything like that, it can be hard to shift into that choice mode, but it's extremely important. You got to wear a coat. Do you want to wear the red one or the blue one? Just any little choice you can give. But also in that same vein, choose your battles. I mean, connection is more important. They're not going to die if they're not wearing a coat. If that's your, you really have to choose your battles when you are parenting our kiddos. So those are the, choices, connection, giving them a voice, naming their feelings. I think for a lot of our kids, when they're feeling these big feelings, it's unsettling and they don't know why they're feeling this. They don't know this is a trauma response in their body. They don't know that they're going into fight, flight, or freeze. All they know is, oh gosh, what's happening? So to name that for them and also just try to get to know and identify some triggers. Though, like we've talked about, it may be pretty hard to do, if they're flipping their lid over the taco shell choice, it might be like, well, where did that come from? But bigger things, like this is a good time of year to be doing this, to have this discussion back to school time. Like our kids thrive on predictability, on routine. So when you have a big change in routine like that, it's kind of like buckle up and get ready. We're going to be in stress mode for a little bit until we are in this new routine.
Yeah. Simi, do you have anything to add to those strategies?
I mean, to Sarah's point, just the routine and consistency is huge, just maintaining the same thing that you're doing, even the playing the game or connecting like, hey, we're going to do a fun activity every day. And that will help everybody, parents and children, we are going to do it every day. And so you'll know to expect it. They'll know to expect it, and then of course, things such as making sure they understand that you're there for them. And it takes us back to those testing behaviors, how they can trust us. We're building that. So we're offering the structure, we're offering the consistency and the fun, but also we're letting them know that we are there for them no matter who they are as well. So letting them explore the choices, such as the color of the coat, or I don't like a coat. I don't like the way it feels on me. Okay, that's something. But also, does your family practice a religion that they never ever practiced before? Maybe they've never even, stepped foot in any type of, religious institution or anything like that. So I think giving them the freedom to say, hey, I'm curious about this. I'm interested about this, especially when we're working with older youth. Like you said, they've lived a whole life before this. So if you cut your sandwiches diagonal and their birth family cut their sandwiches in half, how do they like it? We have the opportunity to make them feel comfortable because it's not about them fitting into our homes, right? It's about us making sure that we're a safe space for them because they have
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
had that consistency in their life. So we have to ask ourselves, what is this something that's important to me or is this a safety issue? Because if it's just something that's important to me, maybe we can let it go. We can, rework this and have a different outlook on it. But if it's a safety issue, that's different. And then of course, making sure that they're set up for success as much as you can before they even come into your home. So with international, I mean, Sarah, I'll let you speak to that more. I know that it's so much more unpredictable in foster care adoption, we're very fortunate because often we know what services they're receiving. Are they
Mhm.
receiving, individual therapy? Do they have medication management somewhere? How can we get those services transferred immediately before they're there so that there's no gap? Because we see it so often that there is, and then our youth are left without any coping. Like it's a recipe for disaster. So, you want them to have that predictability, that consistency of it might be a different provider, but at least they have someone to work with. And because they're going to have big feelings, and that's okay. They just need to be able to express them and be safe.
That's an excellent point about making sure that you can set up services, even if it's not the same provider, that is providing some sort of continuity for them. Sarah, you feel pretty strongly about this, and so I'll let you talk about it. But tell us a little bit about the strategy of setting up therapeutic services in advance.
Absolutely. Yep. 100%. Please, please, if you take one thing away from this conversation, it's do the legwork ahead of time. Because when you're home and in crisis, you are not going to be, calling around trying to identify a therapist. And frankly, they're not going to have room for you at that point either. So do the legwork ahead of time. Interview therapists. Don't be scared to interview them. You may call one and the administrative assistant refuses to put you through to talk to them. Okay, well, that's not the therapist for you. I really think it's crucial to take a family approach. This is not a matter of fixing this child. It's a matter of learning as a family how to best support this child so that they can grow and thrive. And it all really comes down to that connection piece, right? I mean, we all need connection. We all need relationships. So this is about to become this child's most important relationship is this family unit. And like we talked about with the resident kids, it's a huge change for them. So they absolutely need to be part of the conversation. So I think it's crucial to do that work ahead of time. Unfortunately, in our society, we still run into challenges with mental health services and what's
Mhm.
available and what's funded and what insurance covers. So it's going to take you some time to sift through all that and find somebody that really is a good fit for you and your family and the child. State services, look into your state. I mean, we're in Pennsylvania, so we could speak to that a bit. Pennsylvania has a great post placement model that's open to any adoption. It doesn't matter where
Mhm.
you adopted from, who you adopted. If you adopted in Pennsylvania, you get these post permanency services. So also look into what your state has to offer. Your social workers, your agency, your home study people, those are all excellent resources to start that conversation ahead of time so that you're best prepared.
And speaking of starting services ahead of time, let's talk a little bit about what kind of services you can start when you're bringing home a school age child. What kind of strategies should you start to implement before the child comes home regarding their educational experience? Sarah, you want to tackle that one first?
Sure. Yeah. So,
If you just did it.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely be in touch with your local school district. If you're a first-time parent, that's going to feel daunting, but it's definitely necessary. Reach out to the district level, get in touch with the special education department, start familiarizing yourself with IEPs. What is that? What does that process look like in my district? for our families adopting internationally, what does the English language services look like in your specific school? What kind of supports is your child going to have in that regard when they come home and they don't speak any English? So those are things to research, get connected with your school community, start talking to other families, bonus if they have adopted or fostered, just to pick their brains and get a sense of how it's going to be with that relationship with your school and with the educational professionals.
So, Simi, when kids are coming home through adopting in the foster care system, they often already have a paper trail established of educational services and supports. Can you talk a little bit to parents that are doing older child adoption through foster care about what they need to start thinking about even before the child comes home?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could welcome a child into your home from, your same county, or
Mm-hmm.
it could be states away. So really, I think it's important to figure out how much research you're going to need to do and finding out, is there the opportunity to advocate for them to potentially stay in their school, if you have the opportunity for it to be so close, because that, you're weighing, is that better for them? I know it's not convenient for me, but is it better for them? And it's going to be more consistent for them to finish out this school year. But of course, collecting those records, seeing what services have already been in place, reviewing those IEPs. This is all in ideal situations when we can get all of that. Often, it's possible, but you might have to do a little, I don't know, just gentle reminders, to try to get it. You can reach out to educational advocates. I mean, there really are a lot of opportunities out there to get some help if, to Sarah's point, you're a first-time parent, or you've never had to navigate the IEP system, or you've never had a 504 plan or something like that. I mean, I know, and that will vary from state to state, but just making sure that if there are some assessments that you feel like are needed, if you're really not even sure what grade they need to be in or what support they need, just getting that set up.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking to the caseworkers, because you need to find out who is the person that is this child's longest standing relationship. And sometimes the sad thing is it could be the caseworker, and they can be very willing to help you.
Yeah. And we should say also that a lot of times parents who are adopting out of foster care have already had the child in their home as a foster
Yeah.
child for quite a while. And so you can use what you know as their foster parent, and your role will change. Your role will shift to, more personal, and you'll have more authority as their adoptive parent to advocate for them. But you can take what you've been learning about them through the foster system as their foster parent to kind of nudge, as Simi said, those gentle requests for more information, and that advocacy for kind of revamping their IEP if it needs to be done, or revamping their medication protocols if that needs to be done. We find a lot of foster parents they have limited authority to act on the child's behalf with the caseworker. And so a child's medication list or IEP services may feel out of whack, but transitioning into that authority as their adoptive parent, that sometimes feels like a hump that they kind of have to get over. And it can be daunting, but it's an opportunity for you to step fully into what this child needs from you in ways that you couldn't maybe as a foster parent. Sarah, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
I was just going to add, Simi, you reminded me of this when you were talking about the timing piece of it. Also have flexibility. So, in terms of when your child comes home, and I'm again speaking more international, if it's in the middle of the school year, a lot of the training suggests, stay home, cocoon, bond, but stay flexible and get to know your child, because it isn't a one size fits all solution. A lot of these kids, especially if they're coming from an institutional setting, they're used to being around kids 24/7. So then when you put them in, okay, we're going to bond every day, all day, like it may not be the right choice for them or for you. If you're experiencing some of these harder behaviors, you can't pour from an empty cup. It's okay to say, "Whew, I thought I was going to do 3 months and then he'd go to school, but we're looking at 3 weeks. We're both ready for this."
Mhm.
So have some flexibility, pivot, get to know your child. And that's even more reason to be having conversations with the school personnel ahead of time so that they're on your team as well, so that they understand, when you enroll after 3 weeks and they say, "Wait, I thought it was May." You're like, "No,
Yeah.
it's now."
Yeah.
So
Wanted to interrupt just one more time and tell you about 2 other learning opportunities that we offer at Creating a Family, because we love learning and we love sharing knowledge with all of you listeners. The first is an interactive training support curriculum that's ready to use as soon as you purchase it for foster, adoptive, and kinship families. If you go to parentsupportgroups.org, you can learn all about how to access these curriculum, and they make learning in a peer setting with a support group or a community group a breeze. And then the second one is our prenatal substance exposure workshops. These are 3 sessions led by a facilitator, and they're full of practical strategies that will help you parent sometimes very challenging behaviors that come with a child who has prenatally been exposed to alcohol or drugs. It's hard to understand where these behaviors might come from, and so this prenatal exposure workshop kind of helps you understand the impact on the brain. If you go to bit.ly prenatal exposure training, that's bit.ly/prenatal-exposure-training to learn about the next one coming up. You can register and learn all kinds of practical strategies to support your kids who've had prenatal substance exposure. So one of the things that's really important when we're adopting older children is helping them stay connected to their birth family, if possible,
Yes.
to their culture, to their racial identity, to their community that they had before they came to our homes. Simi, can you speak a little bit to how parents can start, say they have an identified child and they know that they're bringing home, a child from India or a child from a Hispanic community in San Antonio, for example. Let's talk about some of that.
I think you can prepare even if you don't know the youth that you're going to be adopting yet. If they haven't entered your home or you're just starting this process and you're training, you can prepare for these situations as much as possible. So researching local, as simple as like hair care, right? Natural hair care, knowing what to do is huge. It makes our youth feel comfortable. It makes them feel, you have to do it. So researching those things ahead of time. Where can I go? What are some local communities around me? And taking a look around and saying, okay, who isn't around me? Who am I not seeing representation from? What cultures are not represented around me? And how can I change that? Because we can't, again, expect our youth to come in and then just erase their past. We don't want that. We want to love all parts of them and let them know that they're welcome as they are, so really making an effort to bring their culture into your home. And food is huge. Learning about different cultures through food. I mean, that's always a really popular one, right?
Yeah.
So I think just making them feel seen is super important and will help build that trust. Also, if you have the opportunity to know anything about their birth family and culture before, really thinking about what you're comfortable with in terms of contact, sibling relationships, birth parent relationships, grandparent relationships. These are all things that you can't wait until the end to do. And you might be in a situation where, as a parent adopting from foster care, when you're meeting a youth, it's not just they automatically come in your home and they don't have say. So want their opinion? Do they feel comfortable with you? And if you're not prepared to say, we are willing to support you in this way, this way, this way, and that's important to them, they're allowed to vocalize that. And we want them to, right? Because we want to set families up for success, not for a disruption because it's not working. So you don't have to feel comfortable and say you're comfortable with things that you aren't, but it is important to be honest and transparent about the things that you don't know or that you're just not sure of.
Yeah.
I think too, just be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. Really look into your own biases, look at your support system. What does that look like? What do the schools look like? Do I have preconceived notions about certain cultures or communities? Explore that. Do you have an uncle that's been known to make off-color jokes? Like, you're going to have those conversations, because it's really important to have that safe space that you're bringing your child into where, like you said to me, they feel seen and understood and not odd man out because they look different than their new family. So I think it's important to be okay with your own uncomfort and to have that, some realizations of like, maybe I do have some biases in this area. How could I fix that? Like, how could I address that? And how can I fix it for the sake of welcoming my new child?
And for the sake of your family unit, because it is so healthy for all of our children, the new child and our resident children, to see us opening our minds, opening our hearts, and welcoming people that are different than us. And understanding that each of those differences can be valuable and beautiful in the tapestry of our whole family as a unit, and welcoming that mentality of learning and keep learning about the world around me. I would also add, if you are welcoming a child of another race or another culture or another country, look at your media in your home. What music are you listening to? What movies do you watch together as a family? What books are you reading? Is there enough diversity in those safe spaces that you've already established for your family as family movie night or music we listen to in the car? Is there enough diversity in that our kids can find not just representatives from their own race and their own culture, but representatives from other races and other cultures that say, my family welcomes all of this, and teaching them to just respect the dignity and the preciousness of all of it. I think it just makes them better humans in general, but it certainly communicates welcome and safety to the child that we're welcoming in our home.
Language too. You mentioned, welcoming a child, especially an older child from another country who speaks a totally different language. Learn some phrases. I mean, learn some things that may provide comfort to them. Sure, there's some great apps these days that do a decent job at translating, but that's artificial. So dig deep into the language and do what you can while you're waiting to learn as much as you can. Also providing opportunities for your child to keep their language. So as quickly, even the older kids, I mean, they tend to learn English at a phenomenal rate, but as quickly as they're learning the English, they're forgetting the native language. So to already have that lined up, perhaps you have a virtual tutor that can help them keep their native language. There's also, again, we've talked about many times during this conversation, each kid is different. Some kids are seeing this as their new start and they don't want any part of their previous culture for maybe reasons they know, maybe reasons they don't know. So while it is, somewhat child-led, you still have to continually offer those resources and, to your point, like have the media and the books so they know I'm welcome here and it's available to me if I do decide that I want to explore it more.
So let's talk about culture of a slightly different kind. When an older child is coming to us from a culture where they didn't have maybe a lot of limits or boundaries on their behavior or their activities or their interests or their comings and goings, and they're coming into a family that has, established rules and boundaries around screen time use or around the kind of screen time they take in or the kind of music they listen to or how freely they come and go in and out of the house with permission or without permission. They just kind of do what they need to do. How do you prepare parents for some of those realities? And I'm going to kind of focus on Simi for this one because that's probably more relevant to older child adoption in the foster care system as far as those freedoms like that. So just talk a little bit about that for us, Simi.
Yeah, I think really if you try to control everything, you will fail. So really thinking long and hard about the difference between safety and preference a lot. Having boundaries, having expectations, really, you're not laying it out there in like a family meeting where you're like, this is what we do and this is what we don't do. And you're going to follow these rules because you're going to fit in here. No, these are our expectations and why. Why do you ask that everybody come in by a certain time? Safety? Okay, explain that to them because you don't want to just have rules that they're going to push back on and say like, well, this, like, I don't get it. I don't understand why. Also, just the consistency and structure, I think naturally children and youth do crave that. They are going to say they very much don't want it, but their bodies crave the consistency, right? So having a time that we're powering down electronics, or maybe you don't allow electronics upstairs in your homes, just explaining all of this, setting the expectation out there, making sure that they know this is something that we can discuss. And this is something that, I'm not willing to really budge on right now, but I'm happy to talk about it as much as you want. And I want to know the why of why this is maybe making you upset. And all of that sounds very nice and doable beforehand. And in the moment, it's stressful, but I
A little
think
more challenging.
Yeah, just might not go quite the same way that you envisioned in your head, but really just keeping an open door policy, keeping those lines of communication open to let them know that like I'm here to talk about it because boundaries are huge and every home is different.
Right.
What you allow in your home is going to be completely different than what someone else does. So we can't expect them to come in and understand, you know, I'm not allowed to keep a light on when I sleep here. I mean, it can be as simple as that. It doesn't
Right.
even have to be
Right.
anything like negative. It could just be, I don't understand. And I was allowed to
Right.
do that before.
Yeah, that clear communication, setting the expectations, and try not to use a ton of rules or a ton of policies or expectations at the
Yeah.
start, kind of ease into it and do a lot of observing, a lot of watching. What are they reacting to?
Mhm.
What's kind of their underlying thought process in this? And engaging in that curiosity language. Hey, I noticed that you sleep with your light on every night. You want to talk about why? Can you share with me why? And maybe your brother is sharing a room with you and it's really hard for him to sleep with so many lights on. So can we talk
Mhm.
about how to find a better balance between you and your needs and your brother's needs?
Yeah.
But yeah, having the open, clear communication as frequently as you possibly can, just keeping that open door, like you said. I appreciate that.
I think too, and this kind of goes back to strategy a little bit, but it ties into this. Of course, say yes as much as you can to foster
Yeah.
that connection. But when
Yep.
you can't say yes, try not to say no. So and it gets a little
That's a good point.
complicated, but like
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to the movies right now. Okay, I hear you're excited to go to the movies. Let's call dad, check his schedule for the next few days, and see when we're able to pencil it in. So
Yep.
Mhm.
you didn't say no, you're not going right now, but you did. So just to kind of keep that in mind. Like if you can't say yes, try to stay away from the no.
Hard,
Like
clear no.
try
Right.
to, yeah.
And also, I think specifically in foster care adoption, if you have the opportunity to speak to the casework staff or the previous caregiver for
Mm-hmm.
the youth entering your home, that's huge because you can find out what their comfort items are. I mean, what time do they usually eat? What time do they have to come in? Do they have to do their homework right away? Are they allowed to do it later? Those things are really important to know because you might go through this list and say, well, it's exact opposite of what we do in my house.
Right. Right.
So what are we going to do? Because you, again, we can't expect them to come in and completely adapt. If we can say, you know what, as long as that homework's done and they like to do it at this time of the day, that's okay with me. They like to come in at 7, okay with me. I can adapt to that. And I will explain to, if you have other children in the home, we'll talk about, hey, what do you think? This is what might be happening. Is this something that
Mm-hmm.
you're interested in? You're just starting those conversations because it's our responsibility to do that research ahead of time as much as we can to figure out what the triggers are, what's going well, and if it's going well, okay. If it's safe, maybe don't change it.
Right. Right. Sarah, let's talk a little bit about the signs that maybe would indicate that your new older child is not adapting to the home or attaching securely and catching on to who they are in the role of this family now. What are some signs of that?
Sure. Of course, it can vary kid to kid, but,
Right.
withdrawal, lack of engagement, disinterest, not making any progress in the areas
Mm-hmm.
of behavior and connection. But I think as much as we ask the question, what are the signs the child isn't attaching and feeling connected? I think we have to look at ourselves and ask that of ourselves as well. What are some signs that I'm not feeling like I'm connecting to this child? Because usually the two go hand in hand. If we're seeing some of those withdrawal behaviors and lack of interest behaviors, let's really look at, okay, well, what have we done in terms of connective activities over the past several weeks or months? And where can we do better there and fill in and see if we could turn this around?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Simi, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was great. I mean, honestly, it's truly paying attention to what is going on and getting yourself out of that fight, flight, or freeze state yourself
Right.
and really being reflective. And to Sarah's point earlier, you can't pour from an empty cup. And it really does start with us because our kids are going to mirror how we are reacting to situations as well. So they are going to see that if we are stressed out over them not attaching or us not attaching, they're going to feel that. And I think just observing them,
Mm-hmm.
watching what they're doing, and every child being so different, you have to really pay attention to, is this different for them? Is this
Right.
different than how they entered my home or how their previous caregiver explained their personality is? If they're outgoing and now they're withdrawn, that is absolutely something to pay attention to. And you want to, get them the resources fast as possible.
Yeah, it's that observant piece, like you said. It's that connection piece. It's trying to identify some of those triggers. I've had families
Yeah.
say to me, every day after school, he loses it when I say, do your homework. And I'm like, so forget the homework. And it's things like that that parents are like, what do you mean forget the homework?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
more important here?
Right.
Mhm.
The
Right.
academics right now? Like, I think it's that understanding that once that safety and that connection, that felt safety starts
Mm-hmm.
happening, the other things are going to fall into place.
Right.
And they're going to be more likely to listen to you months down the
Mhm.
road when it
Yeah.
is homework time. But today, if that's what throws them over the edge every day, forget the homework.
Yeah.
Don't let my kids hear me say that.
No.
They can't listen to this.
I'll tell them. Well,
That's
and
great.
and
That's
also
great.
like that's why it also goes back to being so important to communicating with the schools, right?
Yep.
Because
hmm
Yep.
then you can have that conversation. Hey, you know my face already. We've talked
hmm
a lot, and you know so and so does not is not feeling homework after school. And I'm sorry, but I
Exactly.
can't
Let's
I
put it in
can't
the IEP.
jeopardize.
Yep,
Yeah, I can't
exactly.
jeopardize the connection here. I can't. So let's talk
Yeah.
about what we
Yeah.
can do to
Yeah.
meet those requirements and is it necessary? Yeah.
And all of that falls under all of that falls under the umbrella of giving it time. Spend time getting to know this child that you have right in front of you. Spend time observing their behaviors, observing their habits, observing their likes and dislikes, getting into that mentality that says, I'm going to come alongside of you and I'm not going to require you to change more than I'm willing to change. And so spending time doing that, I think sometimes parents worry too soon that, oh, attachment's not happening properly. And I'm so afraid that they're not attaching securely. And with older kids, you've just got to be in it for the long game. I mean, with all
it's a
of our
marathon.
kids,
Yeah. It's a marathon,
not a sprint.
For
Good.
sure. 100%. And it doesn't go in like a smooth upward line. It's a dance too. It's all over the place. It's one step forward, two steps back.
Yeah.
It's figuring out a puzzle and what works best for your whole family.
Yep. Well, let's wrap up with some practical suggestions for how we can handle kind of the family dynamics part of welcoming an older child to our home, including sibling relationships. So what are some of the things practical suggestions for bringing home an older child, whether it's international adoption or foster care adoption? What are some of the things that we can just take away from today's conversation, work on kind of in a summary wrap up of these things? And Sarah, I'll let you go first, just kind of one or two tips.
I would say don't forget to nourish all of your relationships because you're so hyper focused on this one. We didn't really touch on, marriage and co-parenting much in this. I know that's a whole other conversation, but it's so important to be, if you are, parenting with a partner, to be on the same page, to be able to say, look, I've had a day, I got to go do some self-care, tap in. And, same with your resident kids, have a plan of, special one-on-one time with them. Do you have nearby grandma that can do sleepovers with them when they're feeling overwhelmed? So definitely don't forget to nourish all of the relationships while you're so focused on this one.
That's good. That's good. Tag team over to Simi. Simi, give us a practical tip or suggestion.
Well, if your state has post-permanency resources, I would absolutely tap into them, because just as much as, you're going to need connection from the people in your life that have always provided support to you, sometimes you're going to need things from people that have gone through this, so whether that be a support group or a professional, absolutely, you're going to need to be set up with that. So in Pennsylvania, we have a really nice post-permanency option, but just doing that work ahead of time before you need it, preferably before your child enters your home, if possible, to see if and what is available in your state. Absolutely start there.
That therapeutic care for yourself as well. I'm sorry, my list is just, you said one thing, Sarah, and I'm just going to keep going.
No, we can tag team. We can tag back and forth. Good.
We've said about the therapeutic services for the child that should be family oriented, but yourself too, go to therapy, talk it out, talk through all these big feelings that you're having.
Yep. I would add self-care that is well-rounded or multifaceted. And that could look like meal services for your family. It could look like meal prepping in advance every Sunday, meal prep for the week. It could look like hiring a laundry service. It could look like hiring a cleaning service. Some of the things that, especially in the early days when you're new to the transition and everyone's new to these new dynamics, self-care that takes some of the load off of your daily plate and refuels you and refreshes you and gives you space to breathe is really, really important. Anyone else? One last tip. Give me one last tip.
I would say just keep learning, keep doing the research, because honestly, it is going to be forever and ever changing. So making sure that also when you're preparing for an older child adoption, you're talking or hearing from adoptees. It's very important. We can, Professionals can tell you a lot. However, if you're hearing from adoptees, I do think you're going to get different feedback and real life experience that is going to be very valuable. So, again, I would seek out that information when you're first exploring older child adoption, if possible.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Creating a Family has a great page where we do highlight adoptee voices and foster alumni voices. I'll link that in the show notes for families. It's one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about. Self-care is kind of my big passion, but listening to adoptee voices as I'm raising adoptees is something that I feel real strongly about. So we'll link that in the show notes as well. Well, ladies, this has been a fantastic conversation. I can't believe the time has flown so quickly as it did. I really appreciate your insight and your wisdom. I appreciate the practical suggestions, and I appreciate how you've journeyed with so many families, including mine, for many years now to help them thrive when they're welcoming older children. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you.
It's great.
Yeah, thanks so much. This has been wonderful.